Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today. Last time around, I tried an old Lamborghini with an engine from a new Lamborghini. This time, I'm trying an old Ferrari with an engine from a slightly less old Ferrari. The F40 is a truly legendary car that spent more than a few years on my bedroom wall growing up until I decided to be weird and start fangirling over 5-cylinder Volvos instead. The V12 F50 that followed this car is nowhere near as well loved, and yet we've almost created one here using the engine from an Enzo. The F140 F40 is fully upgraded as usual, including the body rigidity increase and the obscenely expensive Stage 5 weight reduction. No widebody is available for this car, however. All of the settings are default, except for the downforce, which is maxed, and the transmission, which has been adjusted to suit the car already. The wheels are in the standard size. Increasing the size of the wheels can make the car change direction more quickly, something we probably don't need from a near 1000 horsepower hypercar that weighs less than a Lotus Elise. It has a front splitter for front downforce, a rear diffuser for front and rear downforce, and the Type A rear wing to add some more rear downforce. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. Today's testing ground was Sardines. The F40, despite its rear weight bias, does not get the best launch thanks to being so lightweight. There's not much pushing the car into the ground from a standstill. You might expect that a 900kg car with almost 1000 horsepower would be a complete axe murderer to drive. However, the F40 surprised me by only being quite dangerous to drive rather than ripping my head off at the first opportunity. Thanks to its very rearward weight bias, it does suffer with some fairly dramatic lift-off oversteer, especially at high speeds where the frankly ridiculous amount of downforce makes the front end very twitchy. Sometimes this can make for some very incredible saves that will make you look like a driving god. Other times, it can make you look like a cock. Ow. Since the car leaned a lot on its default settings, I increased the anti-roll bars and the natural frequency as usual. I set both slightly higher at the rear because this can often help with lift-off oversteer. It did not help with lift-off oversteer. The reason for this is that increasing the natural frequency, or stiffness to put it simply, can make the car change direction more fastly. As a result, this can make the car more twitchy, thus cancelling out any benefit from setting roll bars and frequency higher at the rear. While it sounds like I have made a negative change, reducing body roll is almost always a fairly necessary starting point when you are setting a car up for racing tyres, so my next changes will need to focus more on reducing lift-off oversteer. Ow! Ow. Bugger. Oi, get back here! Next up, I finished the suspension. I increased compression, which usually makes the car less unsettled by the curves. I decreased camber, which should hopefully improve straight line traction, and as a result help with braking distances. I set it slightly lower at the rear because this also helps slightly with lift-off oversteer. I added some rear toe in to help with power oversteer, and some front toe out to help with lift-off oversteer. These changes, particularly the front toe out, made the Ferrari feel slightly more vague when it comes to changing direction. If this were a four-wheel drive car, this would be a problem. However, in the F40, it makes the car less skittish and easier to control as a result. The lift-off oversteer is still very much present, however it is easier to control. Power oversteer was also reduced slightly, giving me more confidence out of the corners. My final changes were to the LSD. I increased initial torque slightly to slow down the car's reaction times some more. I decreased braking sensitivity to hopefully make the brakes feel sharper, though this could potentially introduce some lift-off oversteer, but I don't typically find that braking sensitivity makes much difference to that at all. I also slightly decreased acceleration sensitivity to hopefully reduce power oversteer. I also slightly reduced the front downforce, which should make the car less twitchy at high speed. The Ferrari was now generally tidier to drive, and the reduction in front downforce made the car easier to drive, particularly at high speeds. As a result, it was time to see how the car would handle the Nurburgring. While not impossible to drive around the green hell as is, the F40 was still difficult to manage on the low-speed, windier corners, particularly in Sector 1. As a result, I found that adding a small amount of ballast weight to the front axle made the car just about friendly enough to get a full lap out of it. It would be reasonable to assume that this F40 would be fairly close competition for the Countach from the previous episode. After all, the big Lambo weighs more, but it also has more power and is an incredibly stable car for what it is. The Ferrari, meanwhile, is lighter, so it has the advantage in the corners, but it is less powerful and more difficult to drive, so less consistent as a result. So you would imagine they would be evenly matched. However, this ignores one very key feature of the Ferrari: downforce. The F40 is capable of carrying such extreme speeds through the high-speed corners that it will leave the Lamborghini completely for dead over the course of a full lap. Also, despite how much downforce this car produces, it's still capable of the same top speed as the Lambo, which cancels out its power advantage. As engine swaps go, I actually rate this one very highly. It's an inspired choice, and thanks to the lack of a turbo, it doesn't completely ruin how this car behaves. I'm looking at you, Volvo 240. Although it is worth mentioning that the standard twin-turbo V8 that the F40 left the factory with is capable of nearly the same power, so you could argue that this engine barely represents an improvement other than in the sound department. However, I will certainly not complain at a V12 swap, because V12s are the tits. In the end, the little go-kart got a 6 minutes 5 seconds, which makes it the second fastest rear-wheel drive car I have tested so far, only being beaten by the Corvette that literally has double the power. In fact, the only road cars to beat this are the Lamborghini Gallardo and the Mitsubishi GTO with the Demon engine. Even then, this car I believe is capable of going a fair bit faster, where the GTO I felt was close to its ceiling. I even think a better driver than me could get this car under 6 minutes. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time, where I'm going to try something a little bit smaller in scale. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I would greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care of yourself, and ta-ra.